Good morning, councillors. For the record, Oliver Ojiako, with me is Jenna Kay in community planning, who will be going over our discussion with you this morning. Councillors, we are here to just, as an informational item, to bring you up to date as to the progress that we are making as we move to develop a climate change element as it's now required through the bill that the legislature passed, 1181. As you know, councillors, this is new, so we are learning as we are moving forward with this. However, we do have a guidance from Department of Commerce, and we are relying on that, as well as the grant coming from the Department of Commerce as the legislature funded this effort. And again, we are here to go over the progress we've made to date and see if you have any questions. As I indicated, this is new, and we are going to focus today on a portion of what the bill says we have to do. There are two: greenhouse reduction and then resilience. Today we'll focus on resilience, and with that, let me turn it over to Jenna.
Okay, I think I'm on. Okay. Good morning, councillors. As Oliver said, my name is Jenna Kay with Community Planning. And our plan for the presentation is to just very quickly review how the climate element fits into the broader comprehensive plan project, and a quick recap of requirements in the legislation. And then we'll focus most of our time providing a progress update on our resilience sub-element, and we'll wrap up reviewing next steps. So you have seen this slide before. This is the high-level overview of the periodic update process. And so the check marks are showing items that have been completed so far. And the climate change planning work relates to the two items circled on this slide, which relate to updates to the comprehensive plan text and policies. And so in the grand scheme of things, that is where this climate element work fits into this broader project. Go to the next slide. All right, and then this is just a reminder of the timeline of this project. So back in March of 2023, the County Council adopted the public participation plan for the whole comprehensive plan project. And then a few months later, in May of 2023, is when House Bill 1181 was signed into law. So we'd already started our comprehensive planning process before this new legislation showed up. In June of last year, we gave an overview of the new legislation. In the fall, a climate stakeholder assessment was completed to inform development of a climate element public participation plan, which the council adopted in November of 2023. After the public participation plan adoption, we started forming advisory groups to support this project. And so we are now in those two orange rectangles for 2024, where we are regularly meeting with our advisory groups and doing engagement activities outside of that advisory group work as well. And so that's going to be taking place throughout this year and into early 2025. And then by early 2025 is also when we hope to, as we wrap up that work, have a draft climate element written so that it is ready to go into the adoption process with the Planning Commission and you, starting in the summer of 2025, so that it can fit into the rest of the comprehensive plan adoption process before the end of 2025. Next slide. Okay, so we included an issue paper 7 as part of your meeting packet, which provides a much more detailed just overview of the legislation. So that's there as reference if you'd like it. But I'm going to do the really quick overview just as a reminder, because I know we've talked about this before. When House Bill 1181 was passed into law last year, as Oliver mentioned, Clark County is in the first wave of adopters to implement it. So nobody's done it before. We have no examples to look at. The main things that the legislation did is that it added a climate change and resiliency goal to the Growth Management Act. It requires the county to add a climate element to its comprehensive plan that addresses greenhouse gas reduction and resilience. There are several new definitions that have been added into the Growth Management Act that weren't there before. And themes in the legislation include a need to address environmental justice, use best available science, and that Commerce is supposed to provide guidance to local jurisdictions to help us with implementation. And we have to do all of this by the end of 2025. Next slide. And so for the greenhouse gas reduction piece, that is focusing on goals and policies the county will implement over the next 20 years that will help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce vehicle miles traveled per capita, and prioritize reductions to benefit those in our community who are most vulnerable to climate impacts. Next slide. And then for the resilience sub-element, we similarly need to come up with a list of goals and policies to be implemented over the next 20 years that will identify, protect, and enhance natural areas, identify, protect, and enhance community resiliency, address natural hazards exacerbated by climate change, and again, prioritize benefits for our most vulnerable community members. Next slide. All right. So next we're going to shift into so what have we done since we started working on the project. So first I'll talk about public participation, and then I'll get into the substantive content. When we presented our public participation plan to you last year, we said we would check back in to give you updates. So this is our first update to provide a progress report since that was adopted. And so we want to share, what we've been learning as we've been trying to follow the Commerce guidance, as we're working with members of the public, the advisory groups, and the technical consultants whose contract you all approved last year. Okay, so as you may recall, we have 3 advisory groups supporting the project. We have a community advisory group that's made up of a really diverse group of interests, 20 members from the community who are working towards consensus to recommend climate element goals and policies for inclusion in the climate element. We also have an environmental justice coalition, which is made up of 15 community-based organizations the county has hired to help us engage community members more vulnerable to climate impacts in our community, and also to provide guidance to staff and the community advisory group on development and use of an equity lens to help evaluate policies. And then we also have a partner agency team made up of staff from various county departments, as well as staff in partner agencies outside of the county who are helping provide data and technical review and feedback as needed throughout the project. Next slide. Oh, and I also wanted to mention Councillor Belcott is serving as the council liaison with our community advisory group. So in addition to that advisory group work, we've planned several opportunities for members of the public to participate and provide their feedback throughout the project. So we just wrapped up having a questionnaire on severe weather impacts. We are currently reviewing the feedback that we collected through that, and we'll be sharing the results both to our advisory groups as well as posting it on our project webpage. And the idea of this questionnaire was to understand people's experiences just with past severe weather here in Clark County, to better understand how they've been impacted, to help us make sure we're not missing anything, and to help us plan for the future. Okay, so that's one event, our engagement activity we've done and are just wrapping up the summary of. Next up, we have a community workshop on resilience scheduled for June 22nd from 9 to 11 a.m. at Anderson Elementary School. All of you are welcome to attend if you would like. We will have a presentation and then be asking those who attend to help us share ideas that can be used to help inform goal and policy ideas. And then in the summer and fall, we'll follow up with another questionnaire and another workshop, but focused on greenhouse gas reduction. And then, of course, the public can participate in the adoption process once that's underway in 2025. So these items are all county staff-led throughout the project, and simultaneously we have our Environmental Justice Coalition reaching out to the community groups that they work with on roughly the same timeline and roughly the same topics. So we're working in parallel and then sharing feedback along the way. Next slide. Okay, so moving into the resilience element.
Just pause for a second. Any questions or comments? Because maybe take this in chunks. Is that I, for one, think the biggest challenge we have generally is engaging with the public, and I think you have a good plan in place. But the universal complaint we get, no matter what the topic is, well, I didn't know about that. And so I just wanted you to give a little bit further comment on how we're going to get the word out to the public about these questionnaires and open houses and collection of comments. If you could just very briefly touch on that, and then if any other counselor has a question up until this point.
Sure. Let's see. We are using, we have a project email list, and we also have our broader comprehensive planning email list. So we are making sure we're broadcasting Broadway and also using the county's social media accounts and things like that. And then we're also asking members of our advisory groups to help forward information as well, and have been checking in with the neighborhood associations and some of the other commissions at the county to, again, just, if you think this is relevant, please forward, to your group. So we're trying to network for the distribution. We are doing some translation of materials too, to try to be more accessible to more people in the county. I think that's particularly helpful for our Environmental Justice Coalition members who have existing relationships with people who speak different languages, and reaching them. So trying to think, those are the main things coming to mind. So we're trying to go very broad.
Important to hear that you're going to utilize the neighborhood associations as well. Any other questions up to this point by Councilor Sue?
Just to follow up on that question about participation, how has the participation level been? Like, for example, with the questionnaire, how many people responded? Do you feel like you're getting a good response from the public?
Yeah, so I don't remember the exact number. I think we have over 300 responses, plus we have some more coming in from Environmental Justice Coalition work as well. So, and it's taken us a little bit longer to start to summarize because it was more than we typically get on questionnaires like that. So, yeah, so I think we've had a decent response for when we do these types of activities and for other projects.
And I would just like to remind people there's a deadline today as far as getting comments in related to scoping for the environmental impact statement while we're talking about participation. Thank you.
And if I can add, I believe we actually did a press release as well, a couple of them, even for the meeting today. So that hit all the news outlets, and I know some of the local news has reported on that.
Yes, thank you, Kathleen. Yes, we are doing press release, and there was a press release for this work session. We also had, even though the public doesn't comment, we had a planning commission work session, which was also widely disseminated through our mess list. All those that we have over 1,000 folks on our mess list, so we send a mess blast that way as well. And we have communications helping us out in the neighborhood organization. And we, like we said, we make ourselves available to go talk to any group, share with them what we are doing and how we want them to be part of the process as well.
Do we have any kind of web-based interactive page that someone can go to, not necessarily within a specific questionnaire, but do we have anything like that set up or anticipated?
Yeah, so we have a project web page, and then each of our advisory groups also has their own web pages because it's too much to put all in one place. So yeah, we do have some web presence, and we also are connecting it to the broader comp plan web page as well because it also connects there.
Okay, super. Thanks for all that.
All right, well, I'll keep going then, and we will shift into talking about what we're doing with resilience. Okay, so this slide is showing the this is from the public participation plan. It shows the key tasks for the climate element. And so just focusing on the resilience sub-element, we need to explore climate projections and impacts here in Clark County, identify applicable climate hazards we need to address in the climate element, and then develop goal and a policy list recommendation that will go into the draft sub-element for the comprehensive plan. The next slide. No worries. So to explore climate impacts, we have reviewed projections for natural hazards in Clark County under a high emissions scenario. And so this is following the Department of Commerce guidance, and they are requiring us to look at the climate projections from the University of Washington Climate Impacts Group web tool, which is linked there. It's an interactive tool if anyone wants to go and explore on their own. Let's go to the next slide. So we have a lot of detailed data, but when I try to summarize it up to the main points, when we look at the data we have data for the next 25 years, which is as close as we could get to the comp plan timeline. If you look at the data, it's basically saying we can expect to have more hot days in a given year within the next 20 years, less summer rain and more summer drought, more high fire danger days, and more days that are smoky from fires that aren't necessarily in the county. And in the winter, we can expect to have more severe winter rain and windstorms, more frequent or intense flooding in certain areas of the county, and a higher likelihood of landslides in certain areas of the county. Let's go to the next slide. And so through our initial exploration of climate hazards in the county, we have confirmed that the bulleted list here on this slide include natural hazards that are expected to be exacerbated by climate change here in Clark County. And we also just have a snapshot of a section of the legislation that it has a list of natural hazards we need to address if they're applicable here. And so this list stems from that and relates to us confirming that of those hazards listed in the legislation, these all seem applicable to Clark County, and therefore are things we need to address in some way in our resilience sub-element. So besides looking at a lot of data from specific hazards and metrics, we've also been learning from our technical consultant team that as we start to think about goals and policies, we probably should think about some other complicating factors as well. So for instance, we know that some hazards interact with each other. So if we have more hot days, it could increase the likelihood of wildfires as well. So while it gets really complicated really fast, we're acknowledging the fact that they can play off of each other, and you can get feedback loops essentially between the different hazards. We're also trying to acknowledge that there are different social factors that interact with hazards and can affect the impacts we might see. So for instance, older roads or bridges might be more susceptible to flood damage, for instance, than newer infrastructure. Or someone with a pre-existing health condition might be more sensitive to heat than someone who doesn't have that condition. So we're just acknowledging there's a lot of variety of factors that can impact what happens when we do experience certain natural hazards in the county. Next slide. And then we are also needing to think really broadly for this work. There's a list of sectors on this slide. So when we are exploring climate impacts, we're trying to think across sectors. And I think there's maybe 12 or so here. And this is also to help meet some of the legislative requirements listed on this slide, where it lists all these different areas that we need to help improve resilience in. So things like natural areas, we need to address social, economic, and built environment factors, and so forth and so on. So our approach to doing that is to look across a lot of different segments of our community to try to make sure we are understanding what some of the issues are in those various sectors. Next slide. All right, so we're looking at data. from our climate impacts web tool, we're looking at the county's natural hazard mitigation plan, because it also has a lot of really good information on what's happened in the past in the county. We are getting some additional information from our county and agency partners. And then we're also talking to people about their experiences with the different hazards, because it's one thing to look at the data, and then it's another thing to understand, well, what does that mean in Clark County, right? So we've been talking to our advisory groups. The Environmental Justice Coalition are talking to members of their community, and then like our questionnaire that we put out, we were trying to get, well, how have you been impacted? And you hear a lot about things like, well, when the power went out, this was my issue, or, when the road got blocked, this is what it meant. So it's helping us understand more of the personal experiences of people here in the county to really understand what impacts seem important to address. Let's go to the next slide. So in your meeting materials, and then also linked here on this slide, it's to a table of climate impacts. This is a draft document, but the project team, we're finding it helpful, and we've used it with the advisory groups quite a bit, in trying to think about and summarize the climate impacts that we are trying to address in the resilience element, because we can't address the hazards themselves, right? But we can think about, we need to understand what the impacts are, because those are the things that we can plan for. Okay. All right, so that's a bit about what we've been looking at, and both as a project team and with our advisory groups and with members of the public. And so we're at the point where we are shifting into working with the advisory group to start drafting some resilience goal and policy ideas. So I'll just walk through our approach to doing this. So we started out by doing some brainstorming of possible goals that would help address some of the impacts. And then once we had a list of goals, we are starting to try to match possible policy options that could help achieve a goal. And then we're going to go through an iterative process with our community advisory group and Environmental Justice Coalition to keep reviewing and revising until hopefully everybody's comfortable with what that list has on it. And through that, we'll also be feeding back the public engagement feedback, and technical reviewers will bring that back into those two advisory groups to consider as well. While that's going on, the staff and technical consultant team, we are just trying to check as we go. Are we consistent with the legislation? Are we consistent with the guidance? Is this in another plan already? Should we just point to another plan, trying to connect the dots? And then once there is a draft list of goals and policies, our technical team will do some analysis in a few different criteria so that our community advisory group can consider that before they make their final recommendation. And then just on the side of the slide, we have some example goals and policies that are actually from other, they're current goals and policies in the comp plan from other chapters that happen to relate to resilience, but are just providing some examples of what a goal and policy might look like at the level of a comprehensive plan. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right, so this slide is just a quick overview of so that was the process to come up with a goal and policy list. But if we look at the decision-making process, we are essentially, we're basically in rectangle 1 here, and I'll talk through it. So our community advisory group, or CAG, is considering information from the project team, public input, and our Environmental Justice Coalition. That group is going to spend the next couple months working to make an initial recommendation for resilience goals and policies. Their draft recommendation, we're going to send it over to the Environmental Justice Coalition to review and have them reflect on what they're hearing from their communities, make sure it's being reflected in there. We also we have an equity lens, so a series of questions we'll ask from an equity perspective. We'll talk through that with the EJC, and then that feedback will go back to our community advisory group so that they can consider it and make their final recommendation. County staff will then take the CAG's recommendation, we'll put it'll become part of the draft climate element that goes to the Planning Commission. Planning Commission will make their recommendation to go to County Council. All right, let's go to the next slide.
I have a quick question on this page.
Yeah.
Where does the partner agency team fit in this?
Yeah, so we are calling them sort of periodically as needed. So I think for this resilience work, what's making sense is after the CAG makes their initial recommendations, so we have essentially a working draft list of goals and policies, we would like to send that to the partner agency team for their review, probably simultaneously while the Environmental Justice Coalition is doing their equity review, and then we'll compile that and bring it back to the CAG.
So I have a related question as well.
Yeah.
So the EJC and CAG, is it working well? Is it have the right constitution? Are we getting the kind of interface and collaboration and input? So, you know, the point is, at some point, do we need to adjust, add, subtract, go in a different direction, or from your perspective, the work done so far is just, it's designed right and it's going well?
I would say that for the time being, it is going well. I see one member in the audience, and I think she will agree that so far that they're working very closely together and sharing information.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, if we could magically have more time for this project, that would be amazing. You know, I think everybody, it feels rushed, but I'm not sure there's not much we can do about it. But I will also add, you know, it's taken one group's met 4 times, one has met 5 times. You know, I think we're past the initial setup phase and starting to discuss. And so I think, particularly at the last CAG meeting, right, I think we're starting to hear the differences of opinions and things like that, which was the goal, right, was to have a diverse group. So I think we're hopeful that we'll have some really good conversation moving forward.
Okay, great. That's gratifying to hear. Other questions before we move on? Please.
Oh, yes, that one. Okay, I have one more. I have a lot of timelines in here. I apologize. But this timeline is just showing the project topically, just to recap where we're at. So we've mostly gotten through exploring climate impacts, which is phase 1, and are now in phase 2, where we're developing the resilience policy list. Later on in the summer, we're going to start talking about greenhouse gas reduction so that we can then move towards finalizing the recommendations. Okay, and then I'll just wrap up with next steps. So we're here today on June 5th to give you an update on the resilience sub-element work. We are scheduled to be back before you on July 10th to give you an update on our greenhouse gas reduction sub-element. We expect to have the results from greenhouse gas inventory for the county available by then. So that's what we'll be focused on then. I think that's all we have. So glad to answer any more questions.
Okay, and any final comments, Oliver?
No, Councillor, like I said, this is challenging, but we have good staff and good group and a consultant to help us through this. It's going to come to you for your final approval when we get there.
Other comments or questions by council? Sue?
I have some of both. Will there be funding? I know we have a grant just for this specific work, correct? And will that be available through to the end of 2025? Or is it expected this will wrap up and other things will move forward? I know with our other comp plan update grant, it doesn't continue.
What Commerce is telling us is that in terms of their fiscal year, the funding will, for the comp plan will be wrapped up in June of 2025. For the climate bill, if there is any funding, because we have, what, 800,000, if we don't use all of that, they may reserve it for us to use for the implementation of the climate element. That's my understanding.
Great, good. And I got to thinking when I was looking at page 19 about the impacts, and agriculture, the food system, but the workforce, and especially I'm thinking of smoke for people who have to work outdoors, and really it's the essential workforce. I think they'll be significantly impacted, and the health impacts that go along with that. I know there's a special mask with activated charcoal filters and things like that, but I think if you're undermining the ability of the workforce to work, then that just impacts everything across the board. So that's a thought, just knowing that, you know, we have a farm and we work outside, and we've got special masks now that if the smoke happens, we'll wear those. Will you be talking about this chart? I was interested in this chart of the working draft, unincorporated Clark County impacts and resilience goal table.
We are glad to take questions on it. We weren't planning to go through it in detail.
Well, I liked looking at all the different sectors and the potential impacts and the resiliency goals. One thing related to the weather, for us, you know, a couple years ago, it was mid-April, the fruit trees were in full bloom, and we had 6 inches of snow. So that erratic weather patterns, you know, we got 10% of otherwise what we would have gotten in our crops. So that's just one additional thing. And then I was also thinking about, you know, the built environment and our water supply and recharge of the groundwater system. So I think that may be something worth elevating because the Troutdale Aquifer, which we all rely on, I think it's considered a sole source water supply for Clark County. So ensuring that we still have enough land for the rainwater to infiltrate is an important thing, and it impacts the streams as well, because late in the summer, it's the groundwater that's feeding those streams, and it's cooler water than you'd otherwise have. So that's, I just want to put a highlight on that. And then along with that, I think development that encourages infiltration of water and low impact development are, you know, and I think it's been referred to as the green infrastructure, but protecting areas so that some of those natural systems still have an opportunity to function are just some of the things I've been thinking of as I've read through the material. And I think you're doing a great job. It's tough to be the first ones out of the chute, but I think we could be a model for the other counties that come forward.
Thank you for that.
Stream of consciousness. Are there any other comments by Karen or Glenn? Questions? Oliver, go ahead. You can. I'm sorry. Was there someone online?
Yeah, Chair.
Go ahead, Glenn.
Thanks. I would just want to echo something that I had mentioned, I think it was last week or the week before, when we were talking about, you know, a trial run of some changes to the garbage system, you know, allowing people to be able to reduce methane by composting. And, you know, I hope that we make sure that we are really goal focused in our efforts here, and that we are really measuring impact and the amount of resources that goes into what we're doing. So for example, you know, it's kind of like a return on investment, but not just dollar wise. You know, I think that as a society, we're going to have to make a lot of changes. I think it's important to recognize that people are very tasked the way they are currently now today. We're going to be asking for people to make behavioral changes, and that's hard to do, and it takes a lot of concerted effort to do. So I think it's important that we really focus on the changes in behavior that will make a big difference, and we're careful about not trying to overburden, create too much things at one time to where people just kind of throw their hands up in the air and say, I give up. I want to make sure we're very oriented on really delivering impact on the methods that we choose to focus on, and ensuring that it's the best return on investment that we can possibly get. I think that's all I have to say. I'm interested to see how this plays out. I appreciate the update that you brought to us this morning, and glad to hear that the process is moving well and that the advisory group is functioning well at this point.
Thank you. Oliver, go ahead. You have the last word. Unless Karen, did you have something?
Yeah, just a thought for Jenna and Oliver as this very interesting process goes forward. I would just ask that when you're working with the community groups and with staff, that you make sure that they put on their realistic hat. And by that, here's what I mean. Let's say that they have a goal of reducing miles traveled, which I think is actually on the table. How is that going to be possible with the population increase that is forecast for Clark County? And make sure that they are really thinking about that and reconciling it. Or how is the reduction of miles traveled going to be possible with a decrease in mass transit usage and ridership? How is that reconciled? So so it's not just that they need to take it to a first step, but maybe a second and a third step for the plan to be a meaningful and realistic one. And I think that's a really tough role, but it's the one that I encourage you to do.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Young and Councillor Baumann. These are very challenging issues, and we are exploring all of them. As I said, the Planning Commission work session, some of this is going to require education. Some of this is going to require new technology coming online. The question that you raised, Councillor Baumann, we are also engaged in CTRAN and other agencies. There's going to be some changes that in planning effort that they're going to also be engaged and adjusting to as we look, 20 years from now. Will they be providing more transit route? What will their scheduling be as it relates to, vehicle mile travel reduction? We are going to be looking at land use and coming up with other development pattern in the future that we think could, where appropriate, could address some of the issues that you're raising. And that's really the goal of this. It's not going to happen overnight, as you know. So we are looking at goals and strategies that we are going to be monitoring and finding a way to implement and check back in as to how well some of the strategies and the implementation of that is working over time. In some areas, yes, there's going to be some behavioral changes. In some areas, there's going to be some investment. That investment may happen upfront with the idea that they will realize savings throughout the life of whatever changes you make into your house, for example. So that is how this, I believe, is going to work, in my opinion.
Any concluding comments from anyone else? Otherwise, I think that completes our work sessions for this morning, and you're cutting a path for the rest of the state, and it looks like you're on track and doing a great job. So we didn't hear from Jose this morning, but I'm assuming he just agrees with everything your boss has said.
Thank you, councillors. We'll come back July intend to share with you upgrades we are making on the greenhouse. Some of this is secondary data, and as Jenna indicated, we are relying on the state, we are relying on WatchDOT, and we are relying on our local agencies to help us. Because again, like I said, this is new, and we are doing the best that we can to follow the guidance from Commerce and then what the bill also requires.
Thank you, Oliver.
Thank you.
So we will be adjourned until our council time at 1 this afternoon. Enjoy the sunshine.